Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today we have hit day 114 in the ongoing war between the Russian Federation and Ukraine and its NATO-backed allies. The fighting obviously continues in the east, and at the same time, we have continued to see Western leaders, specifically over the last 48 hours. We have seen the presidents of France, Italy, Romania. We have seen just recently, reportedly, Boris Johnson now visiting Kiev as well. And it sounds like the main route of transport for these Western leaders is not via air transport, as what would normally occur in non-war times. Obviously, there is a great risk as these leaders were to fly into, say, Kiev or some other airport near Kiev, the risk of being shot down not only by Ukrainian air defense systems but by Russian aircraft is a very, very real possibility. Now, at the same time, these Western leaders are still making it into Ukraine, and specifically the capital of Ukraine, Kiev, and they're doing that by transportation via rail networks. And you would think that at some point, given the amount of weapons and supplies that are coming in, a lot of this being transported by Ukrainian rail networks, that the Russians would at some point shut down all rail traffic, or attempt to shut down and make a concerted effort to shut down the ability of these trains that are moving around western Ukraine at apparent leisure. And a textbook example is these Western leaders that have been able to make their way from Western Europe and travel across much of western Ukraine and make it all the way to Kiev via rail transport. So the question is why hasn't the Russians shut down that ability as of yet? And it's kind of I would say, an interesting a question to ask. I've also kind of delved into the possibility of why haven't and what is the reason for Russia not striking some of the more key and important leadership sites in Kiev. And we have seen some limited strikes by Russian forces in Kiev and for the most part around Kiev, but we have not seen Russian strikes on key leadership sites, command and control sites in Kiev in this ongoing conflict. And it kind of tells you the state of affairs if these Western leaders are that comfortable traveling via these rail networks to Kiev. So I've always been under the impression, especially when members of the U.S. State Department and senior U.S. Leadership officials have visited Kiev, while it has not happened often, I do imagine that Secretary of State Blinken was afforded quite possibly protection from U.S. forces, and I would have to theorize that the U.S. Air Force was involved quite possibly in making sure that Secretary of State Blinken arrived in Kiev unmolested by Russian forces. So that is one thing that I continue to be kind of really mystified about in terms of how this is continuing to occur when you're kind of really looking at almost a total war situation in which much of western Ukraine is being used as just really one giant military training and deployment ground right now for eventual deployment and training of those forces after that occurs further to the east and southeast to fight Russian forces. And again, the idea that these Western leaders seem to be completely fine and taking these railway lines from Poland or the Slovak Republic or wherever they're coming from into Kiev really is a question that I think kind of really mystifies a lot of military analysts who are continuing to watch this conflict. Would love to hear the Russian side of the equation as well. Why do you think Russia is not going after these rail networks that would then deny the ability of the transport by some of these Western leaders into Kiev? So would be interesting to know your point of view as well. But the fighting continues in the east, the southeast. We continue to see military operations, naval operations take place. We have recently received reports that the Ukrainian military has used the Western-supplied Harpoon anti-ship missile, and apparently, as reported by Ukrainian forces, the Harpoon anti-ship missile was used against a resupply vessel. Specifically, it appears to be a very large, for all intents and purposes, a tugboat that had been repurposed as a supply ship for Russian forces on Snake Island, and that's this locale here. But apparently this 1,000 plus ton vessel was making its way to Snake Island. It was apparently equipped with an air defense system that at the time the Russians believed that it would be able to intercept some of these anti-ship weapon systems that were being used by the Ukrainians. But apparently, as reported by the Ukrainian side, that and they did offer some video evidence, which appears to be a drone, possibly a TB2 Bayraktar, at a standoff distance, using its very advanced optronic system to monitor the vessel. And you can see this vessel is then hit by what the Ukrainians are reported as two Harpoon anti-ship systems. And from the footage that is shown, if in fact those were two Harpoons hitting that 1,000 plus ton vessel, then it's highly probable that vessel would have been destroyed or sank, given the capabilities of the Harpoon, the size of the warhead, and the size of the vessel that was targeted by the Ukrainians. But still have to double verify that and make sure that's exactly what has occurred. We have seen some instances in the past where some of that information was later found out to be kind of erroneous. But right now, for all intents and purposes, it does seem that the Ukrainians were successful in hitting some sort of naval target with a anti-ship weapon system. In the east, the fighting continues. As I talked about in the previous episode yesterday, the casualty levels that are being taken by Ukrainian forces, specifically in what I call the Sloviansk-Severodonetsk Bakhmut triangle, running from Sloviansk east to Severodonetsk, down south towards Bakhmut, and then back up towards Kramatorsk. Just massive amounts of Russian heavy artillery, long-range, multiple launch rocket systems, tactical air assets continue to pound Ukrainian forces. There has been senior leaders in the Ukrainian military that have, or within the Ukrainian leadership, that have stated that the Ukraine military is now losing or suffering upwards to 1,000 casualties per day, with 150 to 200 killed in action per day. That is up from earlier estimates, which were released by the president of Ukraine, that indicated that up to 100 Ukrainian soldiers were being killed a day in the ongoing conflict. So obviously the Russians are continuing to bring a lot of firepower to bear against Ukrainian forces, and quite frankly, I really don't know, just from an analytical viewpoint, how much longer the eastern forces of the Ukrainian military that are assigned to the defense of areas such as Sloviansk, Severodonetsk, and other areas in the kind of the far east of this conflict, specifically where this ongoing offensive is taking place, how long are they going to be able to stand up to this pressure campaign? Because obviously things are as reported, and continued anecdotal reports as well, things are becoming increasingly dire for the Ukrainians. Further, we have received additional reports that more and more Western fighters, specifically fighters from the United States, that have joined the Ukrainian military in its efforts to fight against Russian forces, have gone dark and are no longer communicating with their loved ones back in the States. So apparently there, with this uptick in violence and heavy fighting, obviously we are starting to see some of these foreign fighters either be captured, and there has been some video evidence released by the Russian side that indicates indeed they have captured several American service personnel that have joined the Ukrainian war effort. And as I had talked about in previous episodes, this is not a war for the faint of heart, and I believe, as reported from some of the strikes that have occurred in western Ukraine, there have been many thousands of foreign fighters that have flocked to Ukraine to support the Ukrainians, and obviously some have military experience, some don't have military experience, but the vast majority of that military experience by these Western fighters has been from their experiences in Afghanistan, Iraq, and those sorts of conflict zones where they had the luxury of fighting in an environment where they had air supremacy, they had ready available airstrike packages for them. In this conflict, that is not the case. They're really kind of right now seeing it from the other foot, so to speak. And unfortunately for a lot of those volunteers, we believe, in fact, they have suffered quite a few casualties that quite possibly the mainstream media is just not reporting on, and we'll probably hear more about that as towards after the end of conflict or post-conflict. We'll really kind of get into the meat and potatoes of just how many foreign volunteers were killed or were injured in this ongoing fighting. But we do know that there have been multiple training sites that have been hit specifically in western Ukraine by Russian cruise missiles that have hit some of these foreign backed training sites where the Ukrainian Legion is prepping forces before deploying them in the east of the country. But right now, the recent reports that are coming out of Ukraine and Russian sources as well is that these foreign fighters are starting to be captured or killed directly in the front line. Specifically, we've heard reports that there have been Americans taken prisoner near Kherson or west of Kherson along this front line here. quite possibly somewhere generally within the geographical location of the Mykolaiv, Kherson area of operations. But it just kind of shows you the sheer intensity of this conflict and what we're continuing to see. But right now, not a lot has changed. What I'll do real quick is just kind of go back a few days where you, the viewer, can kind of see. And again, this map is coming from Ukrainian sources, and many of these sourced reports of change in the disposition of the map again is coming from Ukrainian sources. And obviously, from the way the Russian forces are shown on this map, you can clearly see this is a Ukrainian supported map. So I have had some pushback on the Russian side that indicates that Russian forces are farther along in this campaign than what is portrayed on this map, and that's a very good possibility. But this is right now one of the best maps that is actively covering the ongoing operation right now in this battle space. So we'll forward it here a little quick where you can kind of see what is happening. So a little bit back and forth, but you can kind of see the intent of the Russian operation and what they're exactly they're trying to do. Specifically, we're seeing this pressure campaign in the direction of both Sloviansk, Bakhmut, and then they're trying to come into the back door of Severodonetsk and Lysychansk via Popasna in this locale. And we'll just kind of forward it again. And you can see the ground has been lost and then gained, and you can see the gray area, which is disputed right now. So that's what we have for today. We'll continue to monitor the situation and report. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day.